This is the tutorial on making the maze game. So we're using Microsoft MakeCode Arcade, and we're going to want to start off by making ourselves a background. So under our blocks palette here, we've got our scene blocks, which control everything that's happening in the background. And we're going to grab ourselves a set background image to block. And that will allow us to set a background for our game. As you can see at the minute, the game is just nice and blank, and we don't want that. So we're going to choose ourselves a background image by clicking on this grey square. Now we've got a lot of room to play with. We can make a very big background image. You've got your typical tools over here, your pencil tool, your eraser, a couple of shapes, a fill movement tool. Limited range of colors are available for MakeCode because you are making a classic 8-bit style game. But you can choose the size of the brush that you're using, you can flip the image around, and down here using these options you can change the height and width of your screen. So we've got plenty of room to play with. We can make a nice complicated background. Personally, I am not very good at doing art, so I'm just going to use the gallery up here, and I'm going to choose myself a background image. And I'm a physicist. I really like my space stuff, so I'm going to choose myself the one of planet Earth. So I'm going to select that. Now, I could now just click done and exit out of this, but there is a benefit into naming this asset. So I'm going to call it Earth, and then I'm going to click done. The benefit for naming my assets is up here at the top. I've got an assets tab, and you can see the Earth has now been saved inside my assets. Now, the reason I've done that is because if I were to make any changes to this, if I were to, I don't know, add some stars in the background or something, if I were then to accidentally delete this block, the one that sets the background image, all my hard work changing this image would disappear with that block. By saving the asset, first of all, I've always got access to it. So I can always call upon it again, even if I delete the block. So it's a good practice, even if you're not making any changes, to always name every single asset that you use in your game. So there we go. We've got ourselves a nice background. However, this background isn't our game. If you've ever played a platformer like Pac-Man or Mario or Sonic, you will know that the background is actually sort of very far away. It's not part of the game. It's not something you can ever walk toward or reach. It is just there in what we call a skybox. It is far away from the player. It is just a picture in the background. So what we now need to do is make our level. And our level is going to be made using what we call a tile map. So back under our scene blocks, we've got this selection of tile map blocks. And we're going to click the first one, set tile map to tile map. Drag that in and add it to our onStart function. So everything that happens inside this function happens as soon as the game starts. And we're going to set our tile map and click on the grey square once again. And we can draw ourselves a tile map. Now, very similar palette to what we had with the background. We've got all our customizing options here. We can also, in My Tiles, create ourselves some new tiles. If you are creative and want to create some tiles, you can do that. But I am just going to be lazy and choose from the gallery. So I'm going to pick these blue blocks. And to start, because we're making a maze, I am going to surround this map. So you can't exit the maze, you can't run out of it. There is a border all the way around. If I wanted to make a really big maze, I could change the size of my tile map, just as I can do with the background. But 16 by 16 is big enough for this tutorial. I'll also need two different tiles. One for the entrance to my maze and one for the exit. So I'm going to choose this dark grey one and pop it up here, and this will be the entrance into my maze. And I'm going to choose a light grey block to be the exit to my maze. And then I'm going to go back to these blues and I'm going to fill in my maze. You can fill it in however you like. It is your game. You can be creative with it. However, it is up to you how you do this tile map. If you think of a game like Pac-Man, which is essentially the sort of game we're creating right now, then in Pac-Man, you don't really have a maze as such. In Pac-Man, you can go any way around the Pac-Man map. It is fairly free in how you move. There is not a particular way to move around the map. You can move about quite freely in any direction. You can go up and down all these corridors, and you can find your way around it. There's no particular direction that you need to go. So the same is true with our map here. For this maze, I'm not going to make it locked in. I'm not going to make it a specific route around that maze. I'm going to make it fairly free form so that anyone can play it and move around it any way they wish. As you can see, I'm deleting some blocks here and there. I'm going to lock you in some places. But for the most part, this map can be moved around quite freely in lots of different directions. So here we go. We've got a maze of a sort. We've got lots of different paths to go. And the most important thing with this maze is to make sure before you save it that you can get all the way from your entrance to your exit. If you can't get all the way around, then your game is not playable. One more step that we have to do with our tile map. At the minute, these walls aren't real walls. They are just tiles. Now, you may have played some old platformers and you know you can fall through the tiles, or you are able to have invisible walls where there doesn't look like there's any tiles, but you still can't go past it. That's because the tile map and the walls are separate. We need to click this button here, which looks like a half-built wall of Lego. We're going to click on that, and that now allows us to select over all of these tile blocks that we've placed down, all the ones that represent our walls, and turn them into real walls. Okay, so they won't be red in our game. They are just red in the tile map screen here, so that we can see the difference between a wall and what's not a wall. So I'm not going to select my start and exit blocks. I don't want them to be walls. I don't want them to be interactable. I just want all these blue blocks that I've set down to have become walls. And if I were to accidentally place a block here and there, I can just choose my erase tool, and while this is selected, while this is highlighted red, I can erase these, and it won't erase the actual blocks, it will just erase the wall that I've placed there. This has been called level 1, so I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to click done. There we go. We've got ourselves a tile map on our background. Now we need a character that's able to move around this maze that we've built. And we find our characters within sprites. Now, a sprite is anything that's not part of your map, not part of the background. it is able to move around the level or be sort of interacted with more than a wall. So we're going to go for the first block here, set my sprite to sprite of kind player. I'm going to drag that in, and all this block is saying is it's creating a variable that's called my sprite. It is setting it to be the type sprite, and the type of sprite it is a player. Now there's a few different types that are pre-made. We got projectiles, we've got food, we've got enemies, and we could add as many as we want. But we want it to be a player, which is a usable sprite that we can control. So we're going to click on the grey box once again, and we can either design our sprite using the same palette as before. We can click on gallery and choose ourselves a sprite. I am going to choose myself a little goldfish. So I'm going to pick a goldfish. I'm going to name it goldfish and click done, and that adds it into my assets, and now I've got this goldfish to use. And there you go, you can see he's on the screen, and we can't control him. We haven't added any sort of controls. So the next step that we'll do is add ourselves a controller. Under the controller palette, we've got move my sprite with buttons. A nice simple block that will just allow our buttons to now control this fish. And once the fish is in the right place, the fish is locked between these walls. However, you can see it's quite difficult for us to actually move this fish around. We need to be in the perfect position for it to move between our blocks. That's because the fish might be a little bit too big. If we have a look, this fish is pretty much exactly the size of the gap between these blocks. So we might want to make our fish a little bit smaller so that it's easier for us to move around the maze. We can do this under sprites. If we scroll all the way to the bottom of sprites, we've got an option, set my sprite scale to 1 and anchor in the middle. It just means it's going to shrink from the middle. We'll drag this block in and we can scale it down. We know 1 is too small, so we need to make our sprite just slightly smaller than 1. Obviously a size of 0 is no size at all, so it has to be somewhere between 0 and 1. I'm going to try 0.8, which for this sprite should be small enough that it now fits quite easily between the blocks in our maze, and it moves a lot easier around. There we go, we've got a moving sprite. However, our moving sprite still can fly off the screen and we have no idea what happens to it. Just below our screen blocks, we've got our camera options, and we can set our camera to follow a particular sprite. In this case, our first one, my sprite. So we'll drag this in and we'll pop that in our blocks as well. Now, when we control our sprite, the camera follows it around our maze. Fab. So we've got a sprite that's locked between the blocks, is easy to move around the maze, and you can see the entire maze as you move. Now we just need to make sure it starts in the right place, not at some random spot in our map. This is also a block we find under scene. And if we scroll down in scene, we need to scroll down just below tile map to tile map operations. And in there, we've got this block, place my sprite on top of tile map and then column and row to options to specific locations of a tile. So we drag this block in, and now we need to know where in our tile map that is. If we click on our tile map, we can see that down here in the bottom corner, just after the size of our tile map, there's two numbers that appear here when we are on top of our tile map. Go to 014, 013, 012, 011, 111, 211, 311. We need to go all the way up to our start block, and it tells us it's at location 01. Okay, so we can click done and change our tile map location to 01. Now when we press play, our fish starts in the right spot. Okay, now we need to add the end game location so that you can actually win the game. So back under scene, this time under tile map, we need this function here. On sprite of kind player overlaps with a certain tile at a location. A lot of words just to say that when our player sprite lands on a particular tile, it does whatever's in this code. And I know that my ending tile, the exit to my maze, is this light square here. So I'm going to choose that. And what I want to happen is under game, there's a nice easy block, game over. And we want game over to be set to win. So you don't lose the game when you land on the exit, you win the game. And now if we test our game, we can get the fish all the way across, all the way through this maze to the exit, and we win. Okay, so we've now got a functioning game. We've got start, an exit, and a maze to get through. There's still a few other things we can add to make this game a bit more exciting, is to add an enemy sprite. Now, we're going to have to place this enemy within our on start loop, just like our player sprite. So we're going to click on sprite once again and set a new sprite. We can call it sprite 2, or we can rename it and maybe call it my enemy to make it clear that we know what we're talking about. So my enemy to sprite of kind enemy. Okay, so we are now making an enemy, not another playable sprite. And we can click on the grey box once again, either design one or click back on gallery, and I am going to have this spooky ghost chasing my player. Give it a name, click done. There we go. So we've now got an enemy that's within our game. And you can see with this enemy is once again too big for these blocks. So I'll once again scroll to the bottom of sprites and set my sprite scale. Instead, I want to set my enemy scale, and I'll go with 0.8 again. And that should make our enemy about the same size as our player sprite. Now, we need to choose where our enemy starts. Now, this is completely up to you, whether you want the enemy to start far away from your player, or whether you want him to start close to your player. Depends how hard you want your game to be. But we are going to grab this block from within scene to place my enemy on top of tile map and a specific location. I go back to my tile map. Maybe I want my enemy to start off inside this little gap. So when I'm going to find out what the number is here, and that is 7-3. Remember, I can see it down here. So this is block 7-3. And so I'll change the code here to be 7-3. And then one more block is needed here. Under sprites, I can set my enemy to follow my sprite. And now our enemy, you can see is right there, will follow our sprite. So when I go this way, he will be able to come after us and catch us. So we can go to our sprites and find the function inside our sprites palette that says on sprite of kind player overlaps with other sprite of kind player. So this is saying when two sprites touch each other. And we're going to choose this block and pop it here. And when sprite of kind player overlaps with sprite of kind enemy is what we want to make this block say. We can set it to be game over, lose. So we find this block under game, the game over block once again, and when the enemy touches you, you now lose the game. We can take him all the way over to find out if that happens, and it does. So there we go, when we now can't touch the enemy, which gives us higher stakes in the game to have to get to the exit without him touching us. One last thing we can do in this game then is to make it so that instead of just avoiding the enemy, we want to play a little game of cat and mouse where we're just trying to collect lots of points while still trying to stop him from touching us. So to do that, we need to start setting a score. And we find these blocks under info. So under info, we've got a score block. And we can start by setting score to 0, and we'll do that right at the start of our code. So the first thing the game does is set your score to 0. And then we need something to collect. And we are going to need to overlap with something again to make it collectible. But that means it needs to be in our tile map. So I'm going to click back on the tile map and I'm going to choose some sort of collectible. Something I can find as I go around this maze. We can have a look, we can choose whatever we like most. Oh, here we go, we've got some glowing orbs that we can pop in our game. So maybe I'll pop them every 2 blocks in our game. Okay, now it's starting to look very much like Pac-Man, where there's lots of collectibles all the way through the level, and you've got to try and eat as many as you can. And there we go. Now we've got a full map of collectibles. And we're going to want to try and collect as many of them as we can, while still avoiding the enemy on our map. Now we don't want these collectibles to be walls, because we want to be able to move past them. However, we are going to once again want to check if we're overlapping them. So under scene, we can find that block again under tile maps. Okay, on sprite of kind player, overlaps at location. And the kind of tile we want to overlap is our collectible. And when we do this, we want to change our high score by 1. However, if we just do this, there is a problem. As we move across, I can now rack up as much of a score as I want just by staying on top of one of these orbs. That doesn't work. So we need to get rid of the orbs at the same time. And that's another block we find under scene. If we go down to tile map operations, we can set a blank tile at a certain location on the tile map. So we'll pop that in here as well. And we don't know necessarily which location we're going to be talking about, but it's up here. whatever location we are at, our sprite is at, is the location we want to get rid of the collectible. So we can drag this down and pop it in here. And there we go. Now if we play, every time we land on a collectible, it disappears. But we know we can't go down there. So we got to fly around and collect all our collectibles, as many as we can, and reach the exit. There is one more thing we can add to this game. I don't like the way my fish flies backwards, and we can fix that. What we can do is we can go up to our assets. We've got our fish here. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to edit my goldfish. And I'm going to call him goldfish left because he is pointing to the left. I click done. And then I'm going to duplicate my goldfish, which makes an exact copy of him. I'm going to click on the second one now, which is now goldfish left 0. It's given him a new name. I'm going to edit him instead. And up here on these flip options, I'm going to flip him horizontal and rename him to goldfish right. There we go. So now I've got two goldfishes, one that points to the left and one that points to the right. And back in my blocks, I can add code for these. So under controller, there's this function, on A button pressed. I can drag that in and I can tell it on left button pressed. I want to set my sprite, or rather, I want to set my sprite image. I want to change the color or the picture on my sprite. I want to set it to, I'm going to go to my assets and goldfish pointing to the right. Oh, I've done that wrong. That's on goldfish left. Okay, so on goldfish right, I want my goldfish pointing to the right. I can just duplicate this block. On left button pressed, I want to set my goldfish to be goldfish left. There we go. And when we start, being that my goldfish is pointing the wrong way here, I will change my first goldfish to be goldfish right as well. And there we go. Now my goldfish changes direction with my controls. So as I press right, he goes right, and then he turns to the left. We could also add up and down here if we wanted, and make him more complicated again and give him up and down movements too. But that is entirely up to you. As I've said before, there's a lot more you can do with these games. You can make it feel the way you want them to feel. So you could add lives in for your goldfish, and maybe you can get away with touching the enemy a few times before you finally lose the game. Or you could choose animations and animate your characters as you go around. Or try adding new levels so that there's more than just this maze, and as you progress, you get more and more mazes that get more and more difficult as you progress through the game. All of that is entirely up to you, but now you've had a brief introduction in how to create a game like this on Microsoft MakeCode Arcade.